The night the widow knocked on his door, Elias Crow had already decided he would die alone. Snow pressed against the cabin windows like a living thing, wind howling through the pine trees of the high valley. Elias sat at his rough-hewn table, knife in one hand, a block of wood in the other, carving without thinking. He had spent years teaching his hands to stay busy so his heart wouldn't wander back to memories it could no longer bear. Then came the knock, soft, uncertain, almost swallowed by the storm. Elias froze. No one came this far into the woods in winter. No one who wanted to live. The knock came again. This time, a child's cough followed it. Elias stood slowly, his joints aching like old regrets. He reached for the rifle by the door out of habit, then stopped himself. Whoever was out there wasn't a threat. They were desperate. He pulled the door open, and the storm rushed in, carrying with it a woman wrapped in a thin shawl and 3 children clinging to her skirts like frightened birds. "Please," the woman said, her voice shaking more from exhaustion than fear. "I don't know where else to go." Elias had not heard a woman's voice inside his cabin in 9 years. Her name was Margaret Hale. She told him that much once the door was shut and the storm held at bay. Elias gave them his only blankets, set water to boil, and watched as the children, 2 boys and a girl, curled close to the fire like it was something holy. The youngest, a boy no more than 4, slept almost immediately, his face pale and drawn. The older boy tried to look brave, standing too straight for someone his age. The girl, perhaps 7, never took her eyes off Elias, studying him as though deciding whether he was a monster or a miracle. Margaret's husband had died in the autumn. Fever, she said. By winter, the landowner had taken their farm. She tried staying with distant relatives, but hunger and too many mouths had made her unwelcome. When she heard rumors of a woodsman who lived alone in the high valley, she walked for 2 days through snow with her children because loneliness, she reasoned, might still have room for mercy. Elias listened without interrupting. He had learned long ago that silence could be kinder than words. When she finished, she lowered her eyes, shame burning in her cheeks. "I can work," she said quickly. "I'll cook, clean, anything. Just until spring." Elias looked at the children again. He remembered another winter, another fire, another small pair of hands reaching for him and never quite making it. His chest tightened. "You can stay," he said simply. The relief that flooded Margaret's face nearly brought her to her knees. The days that followed were awkward, fragile things. Elias was used to speaking only to trees and tools. Now the cabin echoed with children's voices, with questions and laughter and occasional tears. He found himself waking before dawn to chop extra wood, to check the traps more often, to bring back more than he needed. Margaret cooked meals that tasted like something other than survival. The children learned the rhythms of the forest, learned where to step and where not to, learned that Elias spoke little but noticed everything. The older boy, Thomas, followed Elias everywhere, watching how he swung an axe, how he read tracks in the snow. He tried to hide his fear, but Elias saw it in the way the boy startled at loud sounds, the way his eyes searched the trees as if expecting them to turn cruel at any moment. Elias never told him to be brave. He simply let Thomas walk beside him, and over time, the boy's shoulders relaxed. The girl, Anna, talked enough for both of them. She told Elias stories she half invented, half remembered, asked him why he lived alone, why he never smiled in photographs that didn't exist. Elias answered some questions and let others fade into the crackle of the fire. The youngest, Samuel, attached himself to Elias with quiet determination, toddling after him and gripping his trouser leg like a lifeline. Margaret watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She had known kindness before and seen it turn sharp. She worried that they were a burden, that Elias would wake one morning and decide solitude was easier than family-shaped chaos. So she worked tirelessly, mending clothes, stretching meals, keeping the children respectful and quiet. At night, when the cabin slept, she sometimes cried into her blanket, mourning a life she had lost and fearing the one she might lose again. Spring came late to the high valley. When it did, it brought trouble. One afternoon, while Elias and Thomas were deep in the woods, they heard shouting. Elias dropped his tools and ran, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't for years. 2 men stood outside the cabin, rough-looking, one holding a piece of paper. Margaret stood on the porch, pale but steady, Anna clutching her skirt, Samuel crying. The men claimed the land. Said Elias had no legal right to it, that someone in town wanted the timber. They laughed when Elias argued, told him he was a ghost squatting on borrowed ground. One of them shoved Margaret aside when she spoke. Something broke open in Elias then. Not anger, something deeper. He stepped between the man and Margaret, his voice low and certain. "She's under my roof," he said. "So are those children." The men left with threats, but Elias knew they would return. That night, he sat awake, staring into the fire, the old familiar ache pressing against his ribs. He had lived carefully, quietly, because caring too much once had nearly destroyed him. Now, without realizing when it happened, he had something to lose. Margaret found him there and sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. "You don't owe us anything," she said finally. "If it's safer for you to ask us to leave." "No," Elias said, cutting her off. His voice surprised them both with its intensity. "I won't." They fought the claim together. It meant trips to town, long days and harder conversations. Elias faced people he had avoided for years, stood in rooms where his past hovered like a shadow. Margaret stood beside him, steady and brave, her quiet strength reminding him that grief didn't always make people smaller. Sometimes it made them fierce. When the matter was settled, when the land was declared Elias's by right of long stewardship, he returned to the cabin exhausted and changed. The children greeted him like a hero. Samuel threw his arms around Elias's legs. Anna laughed and cried at the same time. Thomas stood straighter than ever, pride shining in his eyes. That night, as they ate together, Elias realized something that made his throat tighten. This table was no longer just his. This fire warmed more than one soul. The loneliness he had carried like a second skin had slipped away without asking permission. Years passed, gentle and sure. The cabin grew larger, the land more tended. Thomas became strong and capable, Anna clever and kind, Samuel fearless in a way that came from knowing he was safe. Margaret's laughter returned, first cautiously, then freely. Elias found himself smiling without noticing, found himself waking with purpose rather than habit. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Anna asked the question that had been waiting in the air for years. "Are we your family?" she asked. Elias looked at Margaret, at the children who had filled his life with noise and meaning, at the home that had grown from shared struggle and stubborn love. His voice was rough when he answered. "Yes," he said. "Forever." Margaret reached for his hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. The woodsman who once believed he would die alone learned something the forest had been trying to teach him all along. Family isn't always born. Sometimes it arrives on your doorstep in the middle of a storm, asking for nothing more than a chance to stay.